Good morning, everyone. This is Applied Intelligence, otherwise known as Perry Douglas. I have two really great guests for you today. But before I mention that, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. If you are looking for a place where you can get some, some essentially good applied intelligence knowledge, a lot of straight talk, and sort of deciphering all of the craziness in the universe, this is the place for it. So if you subscribe to this channel, it will be very much appreciated. So today I have Shoeb, Hosain, and Ali from the Good Data Factory. Shoeb is from McGill University DataSphere Lab. The reason I wanted to have this conversation, as you may or may not know, 6AI Technologies, along with the Good Data Factory, are in collaboration with the McGill DataSphere Lab in order to help redefine strategy in the age of AI. What I want to first say before I introduce, or I'm going to actually let these two gentlemen introduce themselves. I want to make sure I give it justice. Is I want to, say one of the reasons why we went into this collaboration with the DataSphere Lab is that at McGill University is that I find it super important that what they're doing there is really trying to prepare students for the real world. Often, Ali, and I've had this experience, when you hire a student, coming out of university, and I remember I hired one student who had a PhD, brilliant, but moving this person from the classroom to the workplace. Oh my gosh, it's like the PhD, is no longer an asset. It was bad. I'm sure it's not like that for everybody, but I think the lab is doing some wonderful things. So before we get into that, I'm going to let each one of you introduce yourself, and then, so hey, we're going to go back to the lab and tell us about all the wonderful things that's happening at McGill.
Sure. So I'll just start with the introduction. Thanks, everyone, for joining. My name is Professor Shoeb Hosain. I'm a professor at McGill University, and I run two parts. One is our Masters of Analytics program. It's a full degree program where we train, obviously, the next generation in data science, analytics, and the foundations of AI. And then more recently, that started about 5-6 years ago, and more recently, in the last year, I'm the director of the DataSphere Lab, so at McGill University. And that is a lab, it's extracurricular, so it's outside of any program, and it's related to all students across the university. And as you mentioned, it really helps in experiential learning, which I'll get to in a moment, but that's my quick intro.
Absolutely. Ali. Oh, is he frozen?
Fantastic.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, Ali Bouhouch here. I'm the co-founder and chairman of the Good Data Factory. I'm basically an AI tech entrepreneur. I've been working on data and algorithms since the 90s. I think I'm probably showing my age. Started actually working on what was called back then computational linguistics, and then got to where we have actually now the dominance of this branch, which we're seeing the fruits of it as large language models, but we're also starting to see their limitations. So excited to be here and collaborating with a business leader like Perry and with a professor like Shoeb.
Yeah. So thanks, Ali. So Shoeb, let's get into a little bit more about the lab. I know what brought us together was, the fact that we are trying to use AI to build strategy, and a lot of what we're doing corresponds to essentially what you're doing at the lab. So, just talk openly about what motivated you to put all this together, and what's so special about the DataSphere Lab and what you guys are doing at the lab.
maybe I'll even just start with, I feel like the lab in a way is a galvanizer for a lot of conversations, and I think we're actually perfect examples of that. I don't think we can probably pinpoint exactly when we, interacted, but we
Yes.
interacted on the subject, and the subject was how do we, implement AI into organizations, and that's what the lab's about, right? It's really about giving that initial chance. So so I also have a background in industry, so I know exactly what types of problems companies are going through, how it's hard to find talent, how it's hard to innovate within. So part of what we did at our MMA Masters of Analytics program was to actually do project work. And that project work, we went into companies. A lot of students didn't know what we would be able to develop, and lo and behold, year after year, we always found that we had significant impact with the work that we were doing for companies, and that we were actually probably avant-garde in a lot of the areas that the students were exploring. And then we said, well, that was in a course, and that has very, very fixed time periods. We then just decided, we need to do something that's open all year round, that doesn't necessarily go on the university calendar, but goes on industry. And so the lab is really about two sides. One is helping companies start in the AI process when there might be a little bit of hesitation. There's a lot of, as you know, costs and high level of expertise needed. But we also feel like there's a way that we can push that along without having a huge investment. And so that's what it is for the industry community. What it is for the students is also, to have a job. We also pay our students
Yeah.
for that work. And in our course program, they get course credit. So it's close to real
Mhm.
experience, but it's not quite there.
Mhm.
And here now we're going that final leg where you're
Yeah.
getting a job, you're working. And as you said, Perry, between that, how do I learn the theory that I can understand what to do? And then how do I deliver well for the industry?
Yeah. Yeah. And just quickly, I just remembered I sent out one of the advertisements for the program today to a friend of mine. And he responded, he says to me, no way. One of Shoeb's, I'm reading from my WhatsApp here.
Okay.
One of Shoeb's master's students built something for me a couple years ago.
Okay.
And they came out of the MMA analytics program. And I said, can I share the name? The name. So the person is Sabah Kwan, a friend
Okay.
of mine, a fellow entrepreneur. And the student's name is Jing Yan Wang. I don't
Zing, yeah.
know if you remember that. So
Yeah.
here's a real piece of data to
Yeah.
show that the lab is actually doing stuff out there. So Ali, now Ali's a guy that I could talk to all day. Sometimes when we have team meetings, with a team and work or whatnot, I think those guys sometimes just turn off their turn off their microphone, go do something else, and just listen to me and Ali talk. Ali has a brilliant brain, and the reason why I have so much respect for this guy is that he can take the complex and simplify it and explain it. So Ali, with that, I want you to sort of get into, feel free to talk a little bit about, the Good Data Factory and how we connected, but I want you to get into what we're doing in regards from the technology side of it, what we're doing to refine strategy, to redefine strategy in the age of AI. That might be broad, but just take it as you feel.
Absolutely. So to me, when I came across Perry, I was introduced by a friend we have in common, Hatim. I was so excited about the opportunity because at first, somebody thinking about using AI to help redefine what strategy is just looks inconceivable, right? Strategy, in my mind, is actually at the pinnacle of what human intelligence does, right? Even amongst us, well-educated people, not all of us are endowed with that strategic capability in terms of seeing things that other people don't see, being able to see the forest as well as the trees. So I took that as a personal challenge, to be honest with you, to even just explore the possibility of, does AI have anything to contribute to strategy making and definition? And what I loved about Perry's approach is it was not a challenge of, can we create an AI that replaces a human being in this task of developing strategy? And I love that, because that's totally in line with my philosophy. This is going back again to the 90s, when I was doing computational linguistics, where I had the realization that computer work, which is basically what AI is at the end of the day, is nothing but an extension of human intelligence and not an external entity that competes or replaces human intelligence. And that's really why I'm here. I'm excited to look at this challenge. And the opportunity for me is for us not just to develop an AI that works for strategy development, but actually to develop a whole new class of AI.
Yep.
An AI that is human-centric. And when we're talking about AI that is human-centric, it's an AI that is capable of actually dancing with the human, being able to collaborate with humans, be able to gracefully work with a human being. And the key thing, insight I got from Perry, is the key ingredient to that is empathy. Is actually empathy is what smoothens human interactions between humans. And there is no way a computer or an algorithm or AI can do the same thing with other humans if it lacks that fundamental capacity of getting into the shoe of their other collaborator, feeling what their limitations are, and being able to appreciate that, compensate for what needs to be compensated for, and be able to create for an environment that engenders collaboration between human and machine. And for that, I'm super excited about the possibilities and what could come out of this.
Yeah, I mean, Ali, thanks. Yeah, empathy is important because I think, for example, I always say ChatGPT, yeah, it can spit out stuff for you, but to have true understanding, you have to understand what the other person is thinking. And that empathy ingredient is important. And 6AI was developed through, my consultant practice, Douglas Blackwell, where we did a lot of these things manually. And I said to myself, Perry can't be a million places at the same time. So obviously, the natural progression of this automation is through software. Now, Shoaib, I want you to, um, from what Ali's saying, how do you see AI's utility or value, right, as utility in the development of strategy? So if you just think about it, right, one of the things we're saying is that if a consultant comes in, you hire a consultant, and as Ali knows, I used to be one, but I'm not big on big on that. That's why I moved to software. But they come in and they would tell you, okay, do this, do that. A lot of it has to do with cost cutting. But what they're really doing is they're accessing maybe databases or information and pass that information down to you. So just imagine if that software technology can do similar, right? You can get a lot of value from that technology as opposed to paying $100,000, hundreds of thousands for consultants. Or there could be a balance. So how do you see AI's utility in the development of strategy and really in the future of work?
I mean, I think it's definitely has always been part of strategy, and I think it's just becoming more and more ubiquitous with being able to deliver. So at the end of the day, I don't think the technology is a goal in itself, but it's more how does
Yes.
it help us parlay our business goals, and it's just the ability to scale and potentially have scale on some things to go faster but then also to be able to go deeper into some of the concepts that we're looking for. So for example, like if I'm thinking about like what algorithms to use in a particular case, I might have my ideas about what I've worked on in the past, but I can then cross-reference that and check
Yes,
with the
yes,
AI to say like, hey, are my concepts clear? Am I missing something? And to be able to search through a vast array of information that a human it would just be like, there'd be physical limitations on terms of how much
correct.
we can consume, just allows us to then also like reduce our errors. So error reduction, being able to scale faster, and then just conceptualizing things that we may or may not be able to do. So I think to come up with the strategy, I agree with Ali. Like this is really where the human spirit comes in, but to be able to then start with that human baseline and then say, okay, I need to explore these options. If that took me a week before, I can do that in a day now. That just really augments our ability to be able to move. So
Yeah.
my perspective is also, if you don't have that as a clear training and utilization in your group, you are going to start to fall behind. So
Yes.
that ubiquitous nature of technology being part of that strategy is a little bit more not only inherent, but is something that I think people just need to wake up to with a little bit more rigor that
Yes.
it's there, it's available. Oftentimes it's not the tech that's the limitation, it's our ability to use it in the right way.
Yeah.
And these
So,
tools are just getting better.
yeah. So I want to just continue that point. So are you saying, technology, has to be used sort of the grinding, the heavy lifting,
Yeah.
the cross-checking, you know, you may sit there and trying to solve a problem that may take you a week or a month, but the technology in itself will, based on the algorithms, will be able to do that very, very quickly. But the executive decision making ultimately still has to lie with the human. Does that make sense?
I think so. For now, definitely the way things are evolving, and we also need to figure out a place for where our utility. You said technology's utility, but our human utility will also need
Yes.
to define a bit more concretely. And I agree with Ellie. Like it would be great for the empathy to start to come in through the machines, but it's also that's a few stages to go. And if it can help us with the grinding, like I love the robotics example, like to be able to lift boxes is extremely taxing on a body. And, if we can have those things start to do those grinding, so that's on a very physical activity and an intellectual activity in terms of the research, the cross-referencing, those things are very taxing on us. And so
Mhm.
if we can lift some of that, we can then free up our time to maybe spend more time on the empathy, maybe spend more time on the longer term vision. And
Mhm.
also, I think where we should have an advantage is looking for those blind spots.
Yep. So Ali,
Is something that I think is going to play
no,
into.
thanks. So Ali, picking up on um, the utility factor and empathy. Maybe to sort of bring it into perspective, maybe you can essentially put into perspective the utility of AI as an amplifying tool, but also the empathy that we're talking about. So maybe if you explain the process, that would be helpful in terms of where 6AI is going with its software and what it hopes to deliver. I think empathy is such an important point, but I think it's important that you define it because we don't want people to believe that empathy means nice warm blanket and thinking like more the scientific definition of empathy would be helpful.
Absolutely. So Shoaib hit it on the nail when he was using that example for robotics. And what it is basically, it's offloading the certain tasks that are extremely tasking to the human. And in our case here, we're talking about cognitive load, not physical load, right?
Yep.
And machines are actually ideal for that. And the cognitive load, the challenges that a strategy development process has is the fact that I have to keep in my mind an exponentially growing number of parameters and things that I need to keep in mind. That's number one. Number two, like Shoeb was saying, I need to be able to do extensive research, right? And be able to connect all of that in terms of doing associations, correlations, causation with the things that supposedly I have kept in mind without forgetting the important ones. And that's again where the muscle, the compute muscle of the machine and its memory comes in handy. Now, in terms of empathy, what we mean by empathy is really the simplest way I can explain it is one word: trust.
Hmm.
And why does trust matter? Trust matters because it is the key to the free flow of information, right? Especially the free flow of information from the human to the machine. I'll give you a simple example to illustrate. If I'm talking to an AI chatbot service that's going to advise me, let's see, about my savings strategy. It's a chatbot that my bank is offering, and I can have access to it in the middle of the night, 24/7, right? That convenience is great. The fact that that chatbot has access to 30 years of banking history that I have with my bank is fantastic, because there's no way in the world I'm going to remember all of that. The fact that it has access to all the loan strategies that have worked for other bank clients that have similar profile for me is fantastic. But imagine the creep factor that happens when that chatbot starts telling me about things that I thought nobody knew. And suddenly now, the trust, and I don't mean the absolute trust, but the trust of being able to share more information now is touched. And suddenly I'm having second thoughts whether I'm even going to pursue this conversation or not. So to me, that's what I really mean by empathy. It's being able to understand not only the data context of what's going on, but the emotional context, so that you can understand how the interaction is being interpreted by the emotional observer within the human being.
Yep. Yep.
And
That's
I've
interesting.
introduced,
So you're really talking about, in some ways how we can even develop these tools, right? Because if we're not thinking about the end user, then it's very possible that you're thinking that they're going to interact, but they're not really. So
Exactly.
absolutely.
interesting.
And
Yeah.
I've introduced this concept of observer because actually that's how the human brain works. We're having this conversation, and in my mind, there is actually multiple observers going on that I'm not even aware of, right? There is an observer that is a selfish observer that's always looking for my interest. There is an observer that is an empathic observer that's looking for the harmony, that this conversation goes smooth, that I don't come across as a creep or a jerk, right? And there is an observer that's looking for intellectual integrity, the integrity of my logical arguments, and so on and so forth. Literally, that's what we're trying to do when we're building our 6AI platform, is we're creating an AI agentic architecture that allows us to create multiple observers. Each one is dedicated with a single task of just doing one thing. So for example, we have an observer that just observes the emotional temperature of the conversation, right? Is temperature going well? Is the human collaborator getting frustrated? How do we make sure that the conversation doesn't sound condescending to the human, right? All of these things are important. Another observer, for example, we built into the architecture is one that allows us to make sure we keep in mind goals for what this conversation is. In our case, the goal is to craft a strategy that actually solves a business problem. but also we create sub goals, intermediate goals, and we have an observer that just tracks goals and makes sure, is this conversation still on track, or have we gone off track, off tangent? And because why is that important? Because it allows you the flexibility to have a natural conversation that usually goes off track, that have the ability to bring it back on track smoothly, right? As opposed to you're saying something, Shoaib, and I cut you off and say, no, let's stay on topic. That just irritates people. And that just, again, depletes trust and cuts the flow of information, right? So this is not some psychological definition of trust that is devoid of practical implementation. It is actually born, on the other hand, it's born actually of the practical implication of understanding that for this collaboration to work, there has to be free flow of information bidirectionally. And for that free flow of information to happen, you need that trust from the human being to the machine. There is a minimum of it. We're not looking for somebody saying, I trust my AI 100%, they're my best buddy. We're not looking for that. We're looking for sufficient trust that's necessary to have a professional, effective, and productive conversation.
Yeah. And if we just comment, forget back to Shoaib, the whole idea of trust, right, is also, and the whole 6AI process. Our IP is 6 steps. There's 6 steps, and that's the name 6AI. But the thing is, if you're working with a human, let's say a manager for an organization, and that manager has a strategy to expand sales in a particular market or whatnot, if you don't, and in terms of building trust, if you don't know, and all these agents working, if you don't know the right questions to ask, right? More open-ended questions to get out what this person feels, right? Then you're not allowing yourself, or you're not, the software will not do a great job in getting as much input from the user as possible. And the most important thing is step one is coming to an agreement, and I use the word agreement, with the machine and the user, coming to an agreement on the strategic question, what is the actual problem we're trying to solve. Because the danger is in step one is if we don't identify, the person could think that, hey, this is a great strategic question, this is the problem we're going to solve, this is the idea we have. But if you don't put them through a rigorous process to get in information and finding out information, their idea might be right, but if their idea, on the other hand, doesn't match with the reality of that market or of that world, you could be embedding in a mistake or a problem from the beginning. So, Shoaib, what you've said when you use cross-checking or whatnot, it is so important. If you would agree, it's so important that the questioning process, getting the right information, and come into some agreement with the machine and the individual in regards what's the right strategic question to ask, and then move forward to the next one. So, from a strategy process, that's a manual process humans would go through, but we're just trying to. If we do it with the machine, we're just giving it like so much power and speed and accuracy. Does that make sense to you?
I think it's guardrails and where we're gonna spend
Yes.
our capacities, right? And think about it from like our calendars, for example. I get an automatic message to tell me that I have a meeting now. It really takes a cognitive load off of me remembering that I have to do this. And so in a similar way, I love what Ali mentioned. It just keeps us on track. And I think to have those checkpoints at a semi-frequent time is critical, especially if we have longer term projects, multi-year elements, and keeping us on track. I think we all could use some guardrails, whether or not it is very tangible, whether or not it it tells us something or just suggests us something. I think there's many ways that we can develop those, but I think the biggest thing, not only speed that machines give us, but it's consistency, right?
Consistency, yes.
That might be a low point on some elements because sometimes you need to be creative and innovative, but other times you really just want to be consistent and coming to what are my top level goals of the organization or this one particular project. Budgets are also something that you really want to keep consistent on.
Yes.
Those would be great ways to lessen our load so that we can then focus on client meetings or making sure that we can provide the empathy to our team, making sure training is involved, that type of elements that I think, a 6-step process like you're mentioning, as
Mm,
well as this automated guardrails
mm.
could just really allow us to free ourselves.
Yeah. So a quick follow-up on that, Shoeb.
Yeah.
So when a consultant will come in and they do a huge report and here's your
Yeah.
nice PowerPoint presentation,
Yeah.
right? They do that, okay, but in a second, the world could change,
Sure.
right? And new variables will be into the equation.
Correct.
So technology now, these agents could be aware, hey, this piece of information, this piece of data that has just come up, the human being with the hard copy or digital presentation, they're going forward. But if the world changes and
Yeah.
new data and that
You need that
data
update.
jumps in, the system, the 6AI process will update it relative to the strategy. I think that's one of the biggest things because companies are notorious for building these huge strategies and taking months to do it, but then the world has changed.
Yeah.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I hoped people were doing it a bit more dynamic, but we're finding that they need help doing this. And it's like I always say, like, presentations are really important because you need to be able to explain how a system was built and how data should be consumed. But then it has to be dynamic reporting, right? And so just as simple as a Power BI dashboard that automatically ingests new data and updates, you want to be able to have the latest information as much as possible. Now, it doesn't have to be real time. It could be monthly, but you're right. I hope nobody is paying for static information anymore. I'm sure there is, but we need to evolve there because I think we're all proponents of data-driven decisions, and data can change. It could also sometimes, be misleading because it can change when the
Correct.
track might uh, be the same that it was. But it's important to highlight some of those things. I think the systems can give us some alerts, but then you decide what you're going to do with
Correct.
that alert. Is it
Exactly.
really off track, or is it going to off track and come
Exactly.
back to, revert to the mean, something like that. Um, and to just have those things with a little bit more dynamism, with a little bit more of a way. And I think we just need to teach people just how to absorb these new pieces of information. And that's
Yep.
kind of where I think that's where the presentation's value
Yep.
is it
Yep.
helps you kind of figure out how to consume the information and have some of that training.
And that's what you mentioned here. That's the human-centric
Yeah,
aspect of 6AI software because the human is ultimately the executive decision maker because AI in itself doesn't know meaning, but the human now is the one who can say, okay, yes, it's updated, but is it relevant or whatnot? So to not have a human contribution, right? Because the human knows the world, or their expertise and nuances. So without having that human-centric approach to our software, we believe would not present full value. Now, I'm going to try to switch to the next topic, large language models. And obviously, 6AI has a lot to say about that. So I'm going to start with Ali in just explaining what a large language model is, because I speak to many people, and even people who you believe are tech savvy, right? Really don't know what a large language model is. So if you can, Ali, maybe you can explain it. Shoaib can have comments on it too, and then we will move to 6AI's focus, what we're developing, focus language models.
Absolutely. I usually like to start with the name, right? Because people forget that there is a reason that these things are called language models. So a large language model, first of all, is a language model. And what is a language model? It's an algorithm that is trained to pick up patterns in a certain input that happens to be a human language. And that happens to be something where I spent a lot of my years actually working on, from the time in the 90s when I was doing computational linguistics all the way to now. So the thing about language models is they're trained to understand not just the syntax of human language, but also the semantics, right? And the amazing thing about language models is that they can pick up the patterns of how language semantics are constructed, as in how do we create meaning with language. And computationally, it's quite actually efficient. Large language models are actually large in what sense? In a sense that they have a large capacity to pick up the patterns. This is usually the number of parameters. And if you think about it, it goes down fundamentally to the architecture, as in what's the number of nodes in your neural network, especially in the deep layers, that you have parameters in that every time an input goes through, you have back propagation that allows you to change those parameters. And the larger the number of those parameters is, the more fine-tuned the model is. The challenge with large language models is they require a large amounts of data to train them so that you can set up the initial values of those parameters and be able to continuously update those parameters as new input is coming in. Now, large language models are amazing, and that's why they're the buzz today. But they're impressing us human beings because we have a flaw. Human beings have a flaw, not large language models. And the flaw of human beings is we're quite impressed with linguistic fluency. So somebody who's eloquent with language will be judged by another human being as intelligent, smart, likable, right? Somebody who may be super intelligent but lacks language fluency will be judged as dumb, uninteresting, and maybe even rude, right? So this is a human bias. And the challenge we have is we confound linguistic fluency with other types of intelligence, like reasoning, like the ability to make decisions, and so on and so forth. So the challenge is with us human beings taking a technology that works perfectly for what it was designed for initially, processing natural language, and thinking that it's a panacea and it's going to solve all of our problems. Why? Because it sounds intelligent. Oh my God, this sounds like I'm talking to another human being. So the flow again is in how we as humans were using the technology. So for me, I love to use large language models for their linguistic fluency. But I will not depend on a large language model for reasoning, decision-making capabilities, because these are still flawed. A large language model can simulate reasoning. They can simulate decision-making. And their failure to do reasoning and decision-making is what we call hallucinations. And hallucinations are not a bug. This is another fundamental thing people have to understand about LLMs, large language models. Hallucinations are inherent in all generative algorithms.
Yep.
Because when I generate, I have to come up with something. And that something may or may not have a relationship to reality. So if I were to summarize, large language models are based on the technology we call transformers. And transformers are basically next token predictors. If I give you a series of tokens, let's say 3 tokens, can you predict the next token, right? And for that, they're awesome. But if you think that that's all you need to do reasoning,
Complex
to do
problems, right? Yeah.
decision making,
Yeah.
complex problems, then the flaw is in your thinking and not in the LLMs.
Thanks. So Shoaib, what is your perspective on LLMs, and more specifically, how do you in the lab utilize them in your objectives in terms of building strategies for clients? What role do they play, and how do you feel about them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a fantastic description of how we're consuming LLMs, and it's okay. Like, I think, at a given point, a lot of technologies become the rage. When I was at IBM, Watson, its language model was supposed to be, all encompassing and solving. But when we were behind the scenes, the development it was multiple pieces tied together, and you might have, an orchestrator figuring out which node to go on. If it was something computational, it went to a calculation engine. If it was something language model, and so, but it looked like this is a one single activity that is replicating what a human does. So I think when you see underneath the hood, it kind of makes sense that we have specialization. And as Ali mentioned, like, okay, specializing in language fluency versus quantitative methods, like those are two very different angles, but I would still like to have one interface that orchestrates all of it. So let's not confuse that with the component pieces that we try to do. So when we work in the lab at these projects, I just want to know what is the end goal that the company wants to solve. And then we say, we'll go and we'll figure out the multiple pieces underneath the hood.
Yes.
Whether it's a Mistral, language model, or, anything that is going to be, broken down in multiple pieces. We might call an optimization engine, which we write in Gurobi, and it solves something that then spits the results back to the chatbot. So at the end of the day, I think I've always seen these as pieces to the puzzle. And I think this one size fits all is a bit of a misnomer. Eventually, these things start to merge, but I do think they are multiple pieces. So from a technology perspective, let the technologists, do what they do best, and let the strategist kind of focus on what are the goals that they need to achieve. If it's a sales target, if it's a conversion target, like focus on that and make sure those are clear. Remember, I think you were talking about earlier about like how do we set the objectives. I think this prompting of the of our of the AIs is going to be super important. And how do we do that? We'll just get better at asking the right questions, because we, in some ways, also have to try to think a little bit like the machine does.
Yes.
And I think Ali was mentioning that should try to think how we do, and we'll eventually get there in the middle.
Yep. And that's an excellent segue. And I didn't put you up to this.
I didn't know it was going to be.
Okay. It's an excellent segue for what 6AI, the heart of what 6AI is doing. So what we're doing is what we call focus language models. So focus language model templates specific for the task. So if you're a person, selling, I don't know, golf clubs, for a particular market or for specific, whatever, you don't care about everything that's going on in the world. You just care about the domain and the area that helps you sell golf clubs, right? And essentially, that's the focus, and there lies the name I came up with, focus language model. So Ali, I'm going to, because I probably will give away too many trade secrets here, but I'm going to ask Ali to explain what 6AI's focus language model is and how it can help organizations succeed in building the strategy and execution for the business that they want.
It's very much aligned with what Shoaib just explained, where we use the language model for its language fluency to be the primary interface with the human being. So the human being doesn't have to adapt their mode of communication to the machine. So they don't need to be prompt engineers. They don't need to be programmers. They just speak like they would speak to another human person, right?
Yep.
But behind the scenes, we'll take that information and then we'll figure out the components of the information that need to be processed by the different agents, right? Whether, like you said, I need to do analytical analysis, statistical processing, I need to go call an external API of a tool that already exists. Why reinvent it, right? If there is, for example, a tool that actually does risk analysis for a certain financial market, I don't have the time or the money to reinvent that. So just so I can say it's all done here, right? I'd rather create a capacity to generate an API call the tool, get the result, understand the result, validate it, then put it in the context of the conversation, right?
It's also, Ali, if you don't mind, I think it's also I think we also confuse a lot of things where we say, machine learning could potentially get to the answer, and that's very plausible, but it might take much longer time. I remember we were doing a project in IBM a while back, and we needed to come up with street names of cities in Chicago. And yes, you could probably, do it through a machine learning, or you could just feed it lists of typical names in Illinois, and it would figure it out in a much faster way. And I think the cost is then you have to balance the thing between, like, how do I get to my answer? And then how do I also reduce the cost? Because if I'm just running machine learning models all the time, we're going to be processing things. And as Ali mentioned, maybe somebody's already solved it, or maybe the data is already available. So I can just, leverage that, and pulling those together, I think, is the key.
Exactly.
Sorry to disagree.
No, that's actually that a fantastic intervention. In a similar way, again, when we need to do research about what's available out there, we just call your favorite search engine. I don't care which one, or you can call multiple ones and actually get multiple results, compare them, agglomerate them, and then do a summary of that. So the idea behind, again, is that we're creating a framework that is fronted with the ability to have natural human language conversations, interactions with the users, and in the back end, we are having the ability to call APIs to actually do processing internally and figure out things on our own, but also leverage not only external systems, but also internal systems that the enterprise might have, and be able to do that in a way that still respects the data sovereignty of the user or their organization.
Correct. And another point I want to pick up on, what Shoeb mentioned, and Ali, you can talk about that in regards to our focus language models, is the cost, right? The cost of, and then I think the article that I wrote the other day, the AI paradox, is why aren't these, I think only 5% of, I guess, the paid ChatGPT models are, corporations have, so there's no big implementation. So maybe you can comment, either one of you, on the cost, and maybe even Ali, you can comment on the cost of us building a focused language model versus, building a large language model. Cost is significant in order, if it's going to be used by people in the workplace.
Definitely, and this cost function, if you will, is driven by two factors. One, its complexity, right?
Yeah.
And the other one is generality. So the more general purpose you want your model to be, which means it can take on any case, the more complex it is, and therefore the more resources it needs, both during the training period, in terms of data and GPU power, but also during inference time, right? So the choice there is, do I create something that solves a very focused, narrow problem, and I can do it efficiently and cost effectively? Or am I in pursuit of this general artificial intelligence where I create one supermodel that can do anything? Well, at least for 6AI, we're clear on what we want to do. We're not in pursuit of general artificial intelligence. What we want is cost-effective and objective, efficient systems that solve today's problems for real world people and organizations that don't have infinite budgets, that don't have infinite resources, right? And because of that, the idea of focused language models and templates is, in my opinion, the right architecture and approach.
Yeah, and I would just add, like, I think we need to use all of it. I think large language models have a use, and as I said, like, if we're going to start the conversation, why rebuild that? I think it has a
Absolutely.
tremendous use of engaging and bringing in some of the concepts. But then if I'm in healthcare and I have very specific terms that I use, there's no way that a general model will be able to A, understand, and B, lead me down the right path. So I think we always just need these pieces, right? And I come back to that, like, you know, we're constructing these various pieces. They are getting better. They're getting a bit more integrated, but ultimately, you know, building that out and going to the value part, and then also ensuring that the cost side of it is well balanced is the hard part, which is, I think, what all of us are working on. So
Yeah, and again, the large language models, the way I see it, is the base technology. But if you look at history of technology over the last 1,000 years, the really, really great and useful technology are the technologies that can build verticals, you know, from a base technology. So we are using the overall, let's say LLM, but we're taking an off ramp because here's where we want to go. Right, we're like this is the off ramp because we want to go here. We don't want to keep going on the highway forever. We have a specific thing. So from a focused language models perspective, we just care about the problem the individual is trying to solve. We're not trying to be a smart aleck. We're not we just care about the customer. And for people who would be using 6AI software and technology, we don't care if we can summarize information like ChatGPT or Gemini. We don't care about writing emails, right? We're a serious piece of technology that can enhance human value. So what we're trying to do is we're not trying to replace humans. We're trying to use this as an amplifying or augmenting tool to increase the value of the human in the workplace, which is good for the organization, which is good for the enterprise also. So before we, are there any other comments on language models, focused language models? Because I have some, towards ending this show, I have some just general, questions to ask you guys, which will, you might have to put on your crystal ball hat about what the future will look like. So, but before I get to that, any other comments you guys want to make whatsoever? Anything about the lab, McGill, Shoeb, that you want to comment on that we might have missed?
yeah, no, I just think it's an evolution, and I think a lot of folks, yeah, as many advances as we've made, it's still around. Like we always want to push the envelope and get to the next stage. So we're always focused on that constant improvement, and wherever people are in their journey, let's get started. I think that's some of our messages in terms of leveraging some of these things. You don't need to worry about whether or not you're there or you're behind. Like, I think that fear is going to stop organizations more than anything else. So, we need to bring people up to various levels, and wherever you are in that journey, there's a place for you to, work with us, and I'm sure with your organization as well.
Yeah. Ali, any thoughts or?
No, I agree with that. It's definitely a journey, and the best way to get on a journey is you start the first step, and you it's a trial and error. You learn, and that's a philosophy we fully embrace, which is iterative process. You learn from every iteration and you improve, and that's what allows you to get both clarity as well as confidence that you're solving the right problem.
All right. So, in one of my articles, explaining the problem in regards to adaptation of ChatGPT in the workplace. But I want to ask you a broader question. I'm just going to read from the article. It just makes it easier, so I won't go on with a long explanation. So it says here, a Harvard Business Review change management article titled "Digital Transformation is Not About Technology" makes the important point that companies are pouring millions, if not billions, into digital transformation initiatives, but a high percentage of those fail because companies are putting the cart before the horse, focusing on a specific technology. We need machine learning rather than doing the hard work of fitting the change first into the overall business strategy. What are your thoughts on that, Shoeb?
Yeah, I mean, I agree to that to a certain degree.
Yep.
I think there's a little too micro focus on we need this technology rather than what do I want to solve and then retrofit it to the specific needs. That takes a little bit more time.
Yep.
But I'm actually okay with things failing. Like as Ellie mentioned, like this is a trial and error. Trial and error by definition means there will be error. But I think it's about how do we adapt from that error and revisit those things, and there will in anything that fails there's always learnings and there's always positives that come out of it. And so let's take that and focus on that rather than getting it right, because getting it right from a low or zero standpoint to like you're fully operational and doing this extensive data science routines is hard. And I think that's why for us it's always like it's going to be a longer path. Let's start that path. For some it'll be a shorter path, for some it'll be a very long path, but you won't know until you start. So I'm okay with the trials and some of the errors. Hopefully with the errors we can reduce some of that cost or wastage. And then, but what's our innovation cycle or production cycle that we can take some of those learnings and make sure that all those iterations become better, so that we're not eliminating error, but we're reducing it.
Yeah. What are your thoughts, Ali?
I think Shoeb is absolutely right, and I've seen this with a couple customers I've worked with, where the fundamental thing that's lacking is a culture of test and learn, right? Because most organizations are not set up for that, and therefore you're seeing the natural tug of war between part of the organization that needs to keep the lights on and part of the organization that's trying to innovate and push the envelope. And the right thing, it's not about the technology, like Shoeb said, it's about creating this data-driven test and learn culture within the organization that allows you to keep parallel tracks. If I'm a manufacturer, of course, I don't want to do innovation on my manufacturing line, because that's going to kill my production. That's going to kill my source of revenue. So I keep that intact, but I have to create a parallel lane where I'm doing innovation. And then once it's stable and I've learned enough about where it brings the most value, then I re-inject that intelligently in a controlled fashion that is risk averse and all of that stuff. Because if you come to the manufacturing people, especially operations, and you're suggesting some innovation to them, they're seeing it as a risk, as a disruption. And for them, that's a no-no.
That's a no.
So you have to keep it's a parallel track. So you can blame
and it
them
makes sense,
say,
right? It makes sense for their objectives. It is risk.
it is risk. So you have to create these parallel tracks so that you can allow operations to happen efficiently and risk-free or minimize risk. And you have to have a track for innovation that is not risk-averse and that is not afraid of failing and learning from that. Once we create these cultures and processes, then we've set up our organizations actually to take advantage of the technology innovations and the solutions that are out there.
If I can just add to that, I think I totally agree. Parallel tracks, but we all, and I think Ali mentioned it, but somewhere where they connect, because we said like they have
Exactly.
to feed each other. And I
Absolutely.
sometimes there's no parallel track. There's kind of like these disjointed things. Then sometimes they do a parallel track, but then where is that link? And it has to go both ways. It's not just, the innovation feeds into the production line, but the production line also needs to feed back into the innovation
Absolutely.
sector.
Yeah.
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 And if I could just add one more thing, I think
Absolutely. Go ahead.
how
Yeah.
do we actually develop our processes and then just teams is also key. So I think in this conversation, what we're adding is this alternative. Like some people think I have to buy this new shiny tool and then I have to hire these very expensive individuals in-house. Well, guess what?
Mhm.
There are alternatives. You could
Yep.
work with the university. Hey, I know one, where you can start that,
Yep.
that track and
Mhm.
build on some of that. And then we can work with partners like 6AI and the groups to figure out what are we good at, where the handoffs happen,
Yes.
where do we take some a more focused kind of productionalization of that, and then get into the group's IT, and just think about that in more of a more sustainable, longer term options, and just giving people and companies more options and tracks to pursue will allow, I think, for that experimentation.
Hmm. Listen, that's really what applied intelligence is. I mean, what you've just
Yeah,
described there is essentially applied intelligence. It's like Aristotle in a sense. I'm big on philosophy, and Aristotle is focused and practical. Just how do we get the job done? We don't, as opposed to, let's say, Plato, where you kind of this abstract world where you're trying to perfect things. So at the heart of it, applied intelligence is practicality. So I got a couple more questions for you guys. Shoaib, you kind of set this one up for yourself. So I need you to put your is it crystal ball hat on, or
sure.
whatever that is.
Yeah.
And if you were advising your students now, and again, the program is wonderful. What I really like is I think you're really ahead of the curve in regards to an academic program. But having said that, where do you see the world of
Mm.
strategy? And I know one of the things I know, because I used to be in the investment business, whenever you predict, you're pretty much guaranteed to be wrong. But put that hot hat on for a minute, and if you're advising one of your students, you know, how would you advise them to plan for the future of work and to position themselves best for how you see the future of work and the future?
Yeah, and similar to what you're saying, companies do, they focus on a lot of tools and tech. Young people do that a lot too, because they're hearing that probably from companies, because the job
Yes.
postings say all you need to do is learn how to code in Python and we'll hire. Like that doesn't solve problems.
Yeah.
But I would say a lot of students, even prospects, come in like, oh, what tools should we learn? And I say, okay, you can start with these, but they might be replaced in a few years. But your
Yeah.
ability to learn
Mhm.
and adapt is hypercritical on the tech side. I think it's going to become more and more important that your adaptability in tech and your
Mhm.
range in tech is where
Mhm.
the value is, rather than I still think there's value with some people being extremely, strong coders and have those hyper
Mhm.
specialists. But if I think I was going for the larger group, I would say your range, your breadth,
Yes.
and your ability to adapt. And then I would say, and I tell my students all the time, is that's the tech side. And then
Mhm.
on the business side, it's like learn a subject well
Yes.
and try
Yes.
to get into some of the nuances that I think will
Yes.
have more nuances in the future. And I'll just say, um, in the sports industry, for example, like
Yes.
that they're dealing with things that they never did before, where they have like AR, VR, and the experience of the user is so different now that there's so many new problems that
Mhm.
didn't exist before, and all you have to do is just like follow a few sites. And I love watching CNBC and just kind of absorbing things that are happening in the world. And I
Yep.
think that builds your resilience. And
Yep.
that is
Yep.
going to be key.
That's a beautiful answer, because I always, you know, um, as you know, I've had a couple kids come through McGill. I still have one there in her third year, but I have, like, for example, a son of mine who has a really good athletic background. He played golf or whatnot, so now he's trying to be, an entrepreneur in regards to, in the athletic industry or whatnot. And what I say to him is focus on your core, your what you're really good at, and then use technology, apply technology to it in order, as I don't know if it's a delivery system or whatever. Okay. But if you are already really, really good at certain topics and naturally good at certain topics, technology now comes in as an amplifying tool to help you get there. So, as a segue to Ali, now, I think really, Ali, with your if you put your hat on as Chief Technology Officer of 6AI, we like to say that 6AI is not there to try to replace people, but maybe just explain how it is there as an augmented tool to enhance human value.
Okay. So to make the connection between the prior question and this one, I'd say, first of all, there is a hierarchy of mindset, skill set, and tool set. And there
Mhm.
is a human bias to actually take that hierarchy in the opposite way, because tools are lowest hanging fruit, right? And
Mhm.
people, it's easier for me to pick
Easy.
up one tool and become good at it. And it's easier for me to sell that asset as
Mhm.
opposed to do the hard work of shifting my mindset in terms of how do I become more data driven and algorithmic, and learning the skills, the analytical skills, the problem solving skills, right? And then being able to decide what is the right and appropriate situation appropriate tool for the task at hand, right? So because of that, what what we see in terms of 6AI is that we really believe that what we need to provide our customers is more of a platform and a framework
Mhm.
that gives them the flexibility to shine, to actually bring forth what their skills, what their abilities are, and for us to be a platform that facilitates that and amplifies it, as opposed to try to replace it. So the word augmented intelligence is really something I believe in. This is us, like you said at the beginning, Shoaib, using again the same concept of um, the same concept of I want to offload the unnecessary things of you. And it's just that this time, instead of physical offloading, we're doing cognitive offloading. And we're reducing your cognitive load. We're facilitating things for you. We're allowing you to scale and do things at machine scale, whether it's research, whether it's correlation of data, keeping track of things, making sure that the process is not a one point in time, but a continuous process. All of these things is really what we're trying to do, is create a platform that implements a framework, a cognitive framework that allows users to find themselves and their abilities within that. And I'm super excited about that.
Yeah. Well, great. You know what, gentlemen, this was really, really good. We went over an hour, which means the conversation was great. So I want to thank you both. And people, you can check out the DataSphere Lab at McGill University. Just Google McGill University DataSphere Lab, and you will find it. And in regards to seeing what 6AI technology is doing, it's 6aitech.com. And you also have a blog in there. I have tons of articles, and I also write on the Medium, and you can always follow my crazy thoughts on LinkedIn too. So once again, and also again, please, I humbly ask you if this show was interesting to you and you like it, please subscribe to our channel, tell your friends, and hopefully this will be a space for really good intellectual and straightforward conversations about what's happening in the real world. Okay, thank you very much. So, gentlemen, happy Monday. Have a good
Thank you. It was a lot
day,
of fun.
and we'll talk to you, and hopefully we can get to do this again another time.
Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Absolutely.
Okay, bye for now,
Take care,
guys.
everyone.
See you later.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.